Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're listening for the very first time, you can find us on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms. We're of course on X, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook too. And joining me, I know he loves these off-season shows more than we're actually in season. I've got Jason McGovern alongside me. Jace, loves you back on, still donning the Spurs memorabilia. How are you, my man?
I'm good because I've just watched Scotland get dumped at the Championship. So my apologies, John, but it had to be said.
Oh dear, listen, the beauty we are trying to record in and around the Euros, to be fair, and I wanted to say a massive thank you to this man for rejoining us. We've had the pleasure, I've got to say, of having John on with us here over the last couple of occasions, where of course the man is here on the back of writing that fabulous autobiography of Ange Postecoglou, Revolution. Of course, the man, the methods, the mastery, in which I know many of our viewers and listeners have taken great pride and pleasure in reading and really holding the hope of the words that John has given us in that book. And they're hoping, of course, there's going to be some really good times ahead. And we've brought John back on really to get a feeling of what the second season could be about under Ange Postecoglou. We're well aware there's some alarm bells, there is some optimism, there's hope. There is some concern amongst the Spurs fan base of what's to come. And I'm sure Jason will not let you forget that during this next hour of the show. John, thank you so much for your time. Given the circumstances, mate, we can't thank you enough for joining us. Always a pleasure, John.
I don't know, was there some football on earlier? No, I wasn't watching it. I'm here. Dear, just get back. Let's talk about Spurs. Always a pleasure.
Man. Listen, mate, pleasure's all ours.
John, I think you'll have a smile on your face when England get knocked out soon as well, mate. So, you'll have your comeback then.
Oh, I was at the last Euro finals at Wembley, and it was that kind of torn. You were there, and you're like, had lots of English mates, and I'm like, it's like, this is brilliant. I really felt jealous about all the fans being there, getting to see your team. But when it came to the crunch, I was like, nah, I don't want them to win a corner, never mind a trophy. So that's just the way the rivalry works.
It is. Listen, football tribalism. I think many that know out there, look, I'm not the greatest fan of international football, so for me it's been a bit of a nice break away from the emotional effect of Spurs that it does to our lives, and to really come away and have a good think about maybe what's to come over the summer. And to be fair, look, we make that joke, and I know Jason can't bear it, because of the nature of the transfer window being fairly quiet. It's nice to do these kind of shows where there's more of an emphasis about what's going to happen, both maybe for next season and looking back at the previous season to see, okay, a really interesting take on from John's perspective, covering Ange in such detail. What does season 2 look like? What does change? Of course, we know from last season there was those aspects and concerns around the nature of dealing with set pieces, the number of goals Spurs conceded, maybe some reservations, some concerns around the style of play, which I'm sure Jason will be coming on to during this show. And really, will we see a more fluid, a more consistent Tottenham over the course of 38 games? Because I think that's the first thing to say, that, look, I think when you look back at the overall stats of Spurs, even though Spurs only played one more game than the absolute minimum being 41, it was an absolute roller coaster start to finish for Spurs boss Ange Postecoglou, as he does approach now nearly a year into the role. Of course, a fifth place finish in his debut campaign did see Spurs secure European qualification in the form of Europa League football. They'll return to Europe, and you've got to say, look, no matter what has been dressed up in the last, 9-10 months about Spurs, the style of play has greatly improved under Ange Postecoglou. And despite missing out, of course, on the Champions League, 5 losses in the last 7, I think many do go into the next campaign still full of optimism and really at a point where they just hope the manager is going to be backed in the upcoming window. I want to come to you, John, because, look, you've been an outsider watching in on Ange's first season. What do you make of it as a whole?
It's been really interesting, obviously. I kind of feared the worst early on. I kind of thought this could be a really brutal start and he could be out before he gets a chance to get his foot in the door. Because, the Premier League is so tough. And you thought he's had a history of starting slowly at clubs and taking a while. And he talks about how that's actually the time he enjoys, when things are not clicking, but he knows it's coming and he's getting doubts from outside. And then it hits, top gear and they take off. So I was worried at the start. I thought this could be a short-lived experiment. Of course, he started brilliantly. And then you think, well, hang on a minute. Is he going to just go and tear this league up? But I mean, it was never going to be that way because, A, the Premier League is far tougher than any league he's ever worked in. It's a far more competitive league from top to bottom. So that's going to be an issue there. B, he's still working with somebody else's squad in his own way. So I think it's been interesting. I think there have been pointers and indicators rather than absolute proof of concept at the moment.
It's really interesting you say that. I mean, Jay's coming over to you. Look, Spurs, they went up by 3 places. They gained more points than the previous season, being 6, scored more goals, despite selling, of course, Harry Kane on the eve of the season, conceding less goals than last season, but they did win more. You have to go back to the days of AVB to actually win more games as the manager, with 21 in his first season. And look, we can't get away from the fact, Jason, I know you have said this in the last couple of shows, he became the first Spurs head coach in half a decade to complete a full season. And that really maybe gives him the foundation to start building for a second year at the helm. And I've had you on, Jason, in and around the last few weeks with obviously the likes of Danny Kelly, the likes of Alistair Gold, where we've obviously had a bit more of a look towards the summer. But looking back now, how do you reflect on the first year under Ange as we approach his anniversary at the club?
I thought it was okay. I thought whilst there was lots of improvements in all the categories, you know, the season before was such a shocking season. It was almost possible not to improve on it, if we're being honest. You know, an absolute clusterfuck of a season where we had 4 different managers or 3 different managers, and you know, a shambolic season, really. So it was probably hard not to improve on that. But the fact that we were never outside the top 5, I think, you know, it was. I think it's where I thought we would be. We didn't excel beyond what I thought we would, but you know, I expected us to be there. But there's encouraging signs. I think as the season progressed, we got off to a fantastic start. But you could, you know, even in those first 10, whilst we were unbeaten, we beat Sheffield United with 2 injury time goals. We beat Liverpool with a 96-minute own goal when they'd had a perfectly good goal disallowed and played the game with 9 men. So there was still 1 or 2 bits within that 10 games where you thought, you know, it's not quite where we want to be. And as the season progressed, we saw less and less of the style of football we saw in those opening matches, and we got a little bit predictable, and we weren't consistent. Some performances where we played well for 20, 30 minutes, but not a 90 minutes performance. I think probably Newcastle at home was probably our only, what I thought, 90-minute performance. Even the Villa away game, whilst we won it 4-0, it was a second half performance, not a 90 minutes.
Yeah. Just to interrupt you on that, Jace, I think I'll be honest with you, I don't want to be harsh. I think you're looking at more 60-minute, an hour. I don't think, no disrespect to Ange, I think in that first season, I can't remember a real dominant.
Newcastle we played really well.
Fair. Yeah.
And maybe the Fulham game at home, whilst I think we might have only won it 2-1, I thought we played well for 80, 85 minutes of that game. But you know, that's only 2 performances out of 38 league games. But there was patches in it where you could see what we wanted to do. There was patches of it where we looked so wide open and so easy to pick off. So I think, you know, so John knows where we're coming from. You're not a big believer. I think you have serious doubts it'll work. And that's without being cruelty or something. But
you're right. I think I have got reservations.
Your alarm
100%.
bells are ringing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm definitely behind him going into that second season, but without a doubt, there's reservations in my mind. And when you look at that fixture list, as I said, 4 of the first 7 games we lost last year. We've got those 2 big London derbies against Arsenal and West Ham in the first 7. He has to get results in some of those. Otherwise, the tail end of the season that runs into this season will put him under big pressure. But I'm hopeful that he gets some of his own players in and we do see the improvement. I certainly hope so, and I want it to do. That's for sure. Because there's lots about him that I like, a hell of a lot.
I totally agree. Yeah,
listen, but I think, you know, one of the big differences with us, and certainly comparing him to Celtic are always a dominant side in the league. We're not. You know, Celtic or Rangers will win the league. Tottenham or Arsenal won't. You know, we're trying to get in with 3 or 4 clubs clearly better than us. So there's serious doubts he can bridge that gap like he could do at 1 or 2 of the other clubs.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you make some fair points there. And I think, look, I'm not going to try and dress it up. I think I have shared my reservations and concerns with regards to some of the aspects of last season. I think I go into the second season in real genuine hope that I'm going to see something different from Spurs, just in terms of more consistency, hopefully a more style of play that is consistent across the board. I mean, look, we can't get away from it. Spurs had a whole host of injuries, a whole host of suspensions, international absences that definitely impacted the course of the season, and not having, consistent runs in domestic cups and a lack of European football definitely hindered Tottenham rather than strengthen their efforts across the season. I mean, I think the biggest things Johnny was tasked with to come into the club was to change the style of play that was from a very regressive and structured team to a more high intensity, fluid type of football. And to be fair to him, look, I've got to say, that was a mountainous challenge for anybody to take on. And to see it play out in those first 10 games the way it did was utterly remarkable. And I think the problem is that, was it a case that some of us, not all of us, were getting very carried away in those first 10 games thinking, we've cracked it? Because in those first 10, you were watching this style of football that was fearless, it was aggressive, it was a real push on the opposition in those 10 games. And Jason's right, in those 10 games, you did see moments of concern, but overall, Spurs were the real dominant force in terms of their possession, their style of play, their real no caring of the opposition to take the game to the opposition. So I'm really intrigued to know from you what you made of the style in those opening 10 games. And you said it yourself in the opening piece there. I think your concern was maybe they wouldn't hit the ground running as fast as what they did.
Right, there are a few quick fixes in football, but there's no big quick fix for anything. Okay, so there's things you can come in and do right away that change it. It's tweaks in formation, bringing guys in, guys that haven't been playing, bring them in, give them freedom, do what you want. I think you have to understand the scale of what he's trying to do. Jason, you point out, you're not the dominant team in the Premier League. You're not going to be. So to bridge that gap, to build a team, and I think we've used this phrase before, it's one from his old assistant coach, one of his players, Thomas Broik, who said, you can beat the better team, but he always wants to be the better team. So he's trying to build the best team in England. And I always said this, I think the last time I was on the show, things were going a bit wobbly, and you were like, what's his ultimate aim? And I said, he wants to win the league. And there was a bit of a, oh, really, really? And about 2 weeks later, Ange said, yeah, I want to win the league. I want to build a team that wants to win the league. So I think it's fairly obvious if you've watched him. He's trying to build the best team in England. He's trying to build the best team in Europe. He's trying to do that. Whether you can do that or not is a different thing. He has faced much bigger challenges than this. This is, I mean, you go back to the Brisbane Roar. So he's at a team and a club full of international players and absolute legends of the game in Australia, playing 4-4-2, knocking it long and winning off second ball. And he goes in and says, we're going to play like Barcelona. Player revolt. He's getting rid of players. Players are now outside the tent pissing in, taking up columns and papers and things like that, and absolutely slaughtering them at every turn because it takes time to come through it. In Japan, he had an absolute, bathhouse rebellion. Them calling the interpreter and saying, who is this guy? He doesn't know anything about Japanese football, what he's doing. And I know Celtic's different because they are a dominant team, but they were a bin fire when he arrived. They were an absolute chaos when he arrived at that club. And I know you only have to beat one team, but you have to beat a lot of other teams to beat that team, if you know what I mean. And it was a slow start at Celtic as well. And I think in the book, I put in these key games, and there's this game up at Aberdeen, and it's 0-0 going in the last few minutes, and people are like, this is not good enough because they've drawn this one, they've lost that one. So he's been through all of this. He's been through it before. It's a big job. It's the biggest job he's ever had because he's going to have constant the level of competition. But I think, as I've made the point a couple of times before, he's also never had this quality a player to work with.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting point on that. I mean, you know what's interesting, Jace, as well, and I'm not bringing him into it deliberately by saying this, but a former coach that actually worked both with Postecoglou and with Pochettino, the difference between the two. He said that Ange doesn't take 90% of the training. He steps back and he can see everything. And several times he would say to me, that plan doesn't look right. He takes the tactical stuff and the meetings pre and post match, which he is incredible at, and brings everything together. The themes that are there every day with Ange: inverted fullbacks, wingers high and wide, breaking lines, but he allows the players to thrive without telling them, you must stand here, you must stand there. Whereas Maurizio was very specific to get to his model. Players hate when they're restricted. The style is so invigorating that it takes away excuses for players, and he takes the responsibility for allowing them to try things in his style. So he seems to think, this gentleman here, this is Ange Postecoglou, that he'll be ruthless in the summer and he'll go and get even better players to play his way. I know that's a point, John, that you've actually emphasised on this show in the last couple of times you've been on, that he's hell-bent on this philosophy and will, you know, no matter what the noise is from the outside, he will be ultimately looking to find the better players to play in his system. And I think that's where, Jace, we have, again, this slight, I would say, amongst the fan base, concern as to whether the brand of football is sustainable, even with better players, when you're working arguably the best league in the world with the best managers that all scout every single team week in, week out. They know how you're going to play. And I think you said in your opening piece, Jace, whilst you have been fully behind the way Spurs have played and ultimately under Ange, they've tried to go and win games, it's whether it can be consistent on a long-term basis with better players and, of course, with better coaching as well.
Well, I think, you know, this business of plan Bs and we're predictable and, you know, things like that. I know exactly how Jurgen Klopp's going to play. Everyone knows how Jurgen Klopp's going to play. You've known how he's going to play for the past 400 games. I think last season, Mikel Arteta played exactly the same way, 37 games. It was only when he went to City that he parked a bus. And actually, you could say that cost them the title, that game, because they finished 2 points short and they never had a go at Man City, who were weak that day. So perhaps if he'd have kept to his plan A for the 38th game, they'd have won it. So I think there's a lot of teams you can say play the same way. I think most you know how Bayern Munich are going to play, you know how Real Madrid are going to play, you know how Barcelona are going to play, the successful teams. And as soon as the team doesn't play that way, you get accused of not having an identity, like Ten Hag had. So, you know, it's right on one hand, but it's wrong on the other. It's a case of, for me, you know, I want to see us play that way. I think in year one, the key thing for me in year one of any manager, it was the same under Pochettino first season. It was the same under Klopp first season. It was the same under Arteta first season. The first season is about finding out the players that won't do it. Because when he's appointed, all 25 members of the squad have got a fresh start and they're all happy and things like that. And then as the season progresses, you will naturally find 4 or 5 that perhaps aren't playing too much or don't quite like the system, think he's a pain in the arse, and do you know what? He's never going to do it. So you have to weed those 4 or 5 out. Then the next stage is those that want to do it but can't do it. And maybe Bissouma is in that bracket at the moment where, you know, he likes the manager, but he's clearly not producing the form that we want to produce. So you have to give a manager time to wheedle through the can't do's and the unable to do's. And I think that takes even more than one season. It'll be middle of next season before I really think you start to see that team start to consistently perform. And again, I go back to Poch. You're a big Poch fan, so forget that. Season 1 was a mishmash of results, albeit we got to a cup final, which kind of saved the season. But we lost to Chelsea and we put 5 past Chelsea. He had 1 or 2 results in that season which helped more, like beating Arsenal at home, putting 5 past Chelsea. We might have even got a result at Liverpool that season, but you know, it was still we still lost at home to West Brom and still lost at home to Stoke and still lost at home to a relegated Villa and things like that. And then in season 2, whilst we actually challenged for the league that year with Leicester, if you look at it at Christmas, going into Christmas, we played 14 or 15 games. We'd only won 6. It's that we'd only lost 1. We lost at Man United on the opening day, and then we didn't lose. But we had draw after draw after. I think we won 6, drew 8, lost 1 of the first 15 type of thing. So even then, it wasn't until that win at Palace, the famous Dele Alli goal in the middle of January, where we started to think, oh, we could have a go at this. But by then, Leicester were too far in front. So, like I say, it took Poch 18 months to really get the team where he wanted to get it. And I think you have to give him that chance to reach that stage. And then if it goes wrong, then we can all throw the toys out the pram and start to comment. But you've got to give him that chance to reach that far.
I mean, John, you've made the point on this show a couple of times that what he loves is being doubted, being questioned, being challenged about whether he can do something. And that's where he does, in obviously his mind, rise to that challenge. Do you think, again, we're in this period where he's going to love the fact people were talking about whether in that second season we are going to see a more consistent Tottenham, both tactically and along with the system and along with the set pieces? Because I think this is where he has really become a guy that has turned those doubters into genuine believers, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a really deep part of his personality, and it goes way back to growing up in Pran, the Greek suburb, Melbourne, where they were called all sorts of things. They were just not treated like proper Aussies, and he wanted to prove to the Aussies that, that the little Greek boys were as important, as good at sport as they were, and he coached his high school team at win the state championship and everything. It goes right back to that, and then wanting to prove, and that whole Aussie thing, as he points out, he was born on the wrong side of the world to be a football manager. He was born in a country where it was like the number 5 sport, and it was part-time, and he wanted to manage, and he had this ambition to manage a World Cup. And he said, "Man, they might as well had the ambition to walk on the moon." So he loves proving people wrong. I want to pick up what you said, and I think, Jason, you were on the same lines with this. It's not just getting better players in. I'd taken a note earlier. What he wants is more believers. He needs converts. He doesn't want unwilling conscripts in there. He needs believers. And there's a quality element to that. There's absolutely a quality element to that. But every time I've spoken to guys who played for him, they say he makes it easy. He's not asking you to do world-class things all the time. He makes it easy, the way they play. So I don't think he has to go and get the very best player in the world to do it. He'll find a player to do it. And he's very good, and he's very hands-on in recruitment, and he knows what he likes, and he knows what he wants. And it's about fitting him with the culture first. And that's his most important thing. He makes that very, very clear. He needs someone who's going to buy into the culture. And he's done that at every club he's been at. So I like what you said, Jason, about you won't see it right away.
You know what's really interesting, John? Go on. Do you want to come back in there, Jace?
No. I just mean you won't see it straight away. You won't.
Yeah. I mean, I know people can gloss over this now because it happened right at the very start of him coming on board. But, we can't get away from the fact that Spurs had a farcical managerial search, John, before he was appointed. We had another 72 days before the guy we landed upon was Ange Postecoglou. At that point, everyone was really Googling, they were researching, they were watching podcasts about the man. I think, again, your book coming out was a real godsend for many because they could really delve into the real depth of what that guy had achieved today. And it's a man that, as we've spoken about, has a very unique style. Previously, of course, won the Scottish Premiership twice with Celtic and then completed the domestic treble in his final season before he moved across. And you know what? To be presented with the most harshest welcome gift of all, to be thrown into this saga over Harry Kane.
Yeah.
And I just, again, when I look back at that Harry Kane saga, I was there I was there for the 4 goals he put past Shakhtar Donetsk in a 5-1 win where Harry applauded all 4 corners and you just thought, well, he's not going to go anywhere because, no one's going to stump up the kind of money being on offer. And there he goes, a day really before the season starts, on the eve, he loses the captain of the football club, the figurehead. You can't take away, John, what that guy went through in the opening couple of months because it was just insanity, right? I mean, you spoke about the fact he's walked into messes before.
Yeah.
But this was a basket case, wasn't it?
That was an interesting start, I suppose. And that is one where probably a younger, less experienced manager might have thrown the toys out the pram a bit or been narking with the chairman, whereas he just... 2 things. One, he knew it wasn't never going to be perfect. If he was going to make it to the Premier League, it was never going to be as Klopp's replacement right away because, guess what? We've just won another treble and here you go, Ange, coming there. He was going to have to walk into something that was a bit of a crisis situation. The Harry Kane thing was interesting, but again, he's been through so many mad situations. And I love the story that I found out from one of his assistants from the book when they coached in the Greek 3rd tier, I think it was, the mad takeover, and they just basically did a runner with their pockets full of euros to the airport, like just get paid and let's get out of here before, because it was chaos and falling apart. So he's seen some bits of madness in football through the years and coming through the ranks in Australia, obviously, where there's very little money and how to do it. Yeah, it was an interesting time for him. And I think he's been watching from afar. He's been Ange, but more so, right? He's just let a little bit more in of the all mate type personality. He's almost played it up a little bit. You know, he was always like that anyway.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just the bigger stage. He's just like, it is what it is. What are you going to do? You know?
Well, again, it's fascinating because there was a battle for his services, of course, a feature in the Euros between ITV and BBC, the two leading broadcasters in the UK. ITV got their way with him and obviously have got him on. I know, again, he made a real decent impression when he obviously did feature on the coverage on Saturday. It'll be, of course, featuring another cut of games as well to come. I mean, look, Jason, one of the first things he had to do when he came on board was losing Harry Kane, appoint a captain. I think Sonny was, for many, what felt the right captain at the time, just given the nature of the fact that you're going to ask Son, well, that guy's given to this football club. Of all the players that has maybe had the opportunity to move on, Sonny, every opportunity. I know, again, you've got a real close affinity with Sonny, given those, again, links to Asia, that, that guy turned down every opportunity to move away from the club where really he maybe should have done and could have done. But again, you look at his season in whole, and I know, again, Son have been criticised by some parts of the Spurs fan base. He finished the season on 17 Premier League goals. Again, in the first season where there was so much up and down nature of it. I mean, how do you think hard was that, Jace, to kind of keep his head when everyone around him seemed to be losing theirs when he came through the door?
The criticism of Sonny, just Sonny-wise, he got criticised the season. He's got 17 Premier League goals in what's seen as a bad season. And he played most of the season as a striker, which we all know when he won the Golden Boot, he didn't play as a striker. He played off of Kane. So, how people criticise Sonny is beyond me. I actually think Kane leaving helped Ange. I think it helped change the way we play. It's interesting, isn't it? We're looking at an England side at the moment that their lack of press is a problem. And I said 3 years ago, Kane no longer presses. He can't press.
So interesting.
It's not that he's too lazy. I just don't think he has the physicality. And then you look at Bayern, where he's gone there and smashed 43 goals or something like that. But Bayern no longer high press properly. And it's the first time in 11 years they've not won the league. So I think it helped Ange, the style of play, to convert, to actually be clear of Harry. And I said to you at the time, remember, I said, I don't fear losing Harry. And we scored more goals without him than we did with him, even though, he is a wonderful striker. There's no doubt about it. World-class striker. It's not a criticism I have of Kane, but it's just a style of play where I think if you want to play front foot, high press, and you see our teams press now, you have to go as a team and you have to do it constantly, and Harry can't. So it leaves you a big problem. It leaves you a big problem as a pressing team. And then you start having to drop deep because teams just play their way out of a trouble so easily now. Defenders are comfortable with the ball. So I think it actually helped Ange in a strange way, losing Harry, albeit it was a nice defence mechanism to say I've lost England's premier striker and Tottenham's all-time goal scorer. But I think if you actually sat there with Ange quietly and honestly, he'd probably say it probably did help where I wanted to take the team that Harry left.
I'd slightly disagree. I think he would have done great things with Harry Kane. I just think a really, really smart footballer and a really, really smart football coach work together. And I'm trying to think, even his first season at Celtic, he had Tom Rogic, who was not a player who fit his style at all, but he was a clever player and worked with him. I think, given Harry Kane, one of the top strikers in Europe, he would have done something that worked. And I get your concerns about the press. I get it. I think he's a clever manager. Yeah. Stylistically.
I just think it's the same with England, and we've seen it at Tottenham, you've seen it at Bayern. Harry's at his best when he drops almost as the 10 and flicks balls wide to the runners. England play better when Rashford was in there with Kane. He does it at Bayern with Sane and Gnabry and people like that. He did it at Tottenham with Sonny. But none of that is high press, keeping teams penned in their box. It's all dropping into that position and feeding runners. And I look at England at the moment, and that's their problem. When he had to stay as a number 9 in that first game, never touched the ball. Never touched the ball. And I think it is a problem that England have got and that Tottenham had, but that's that's now out of our hands. But I do think it kind of helped in a way, and also not to have such a dominant figure at the club, kind of setting the tone in the dressing room.
It's a fascinating debate, and one again, it does split opinions. And look, I think when you look at where that left Spurs in terms of their progression throughout the season, there was many questions raised because I think again we make that point, and John said it there. There's no doubt about it that you put Harry Kane in this team, no matter what, we're scoring more goals. But at that point, Jace, I think.
But are we creating as many chances?
Well, that's an interesting point. And again, are they as effective in terms of their style and the way they want to play in the future? That does leave it all open. What we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners on audio. We've got nearly over 2,500 of you that are watching this live. So, look, again, thank you so much for all your incredible support for the show. We're live on X, we're live on Instagram, we're live on Facebook. Please do get involved. Like I say, throw your comments into us because, again, there's lots of interesting stuff and narratives and debates on this show. Feel free to get involved in the comments as always. Again, opinions like that around Harry Kane. Everyone's going to have their own view. We'd like to have joining us. Go on, Jay.
I'll just clarify it, Rick, before everyone jumps on me. I'm not criticising Kane. I just mean when Kane's in the team, you have to play to Kane's strengths, not to his weaknesses.
Yeah, no, absolutely fair. Absolutely fair. I want to say again, we're delighted to be joined by, the author of that wonderful book, of course, Revolution, The Man, the Methods, the Mastery, by the brilliant John Greechan, who's given up so much of his time. John, we can't thank you so much for joining us. Look, again, you can catch this book. It's in our description, of course. It's available, of course, on Amazon. It's on Waterstones. It's across a number of different sites. So please go and check it out. Wonderful book. For those that are still maybe uncertain under Ange, are still working their way in terms of the manager, have got some doubts. The book itself will give you a lot of background in terms of what that guy has been through throughout really his journey around football to when he reached Tottenham. And I think it's fascinating stuff because, again, someone like me, I don't want to be, again, a person that hides my views here. I think I have got some concerns and some doubts, which is why, again, it's great to get John on where we are coming into that second season to really know what is going to change, what does change, because we've spoken about that start to the season where, look, it was unbelievable, that start. I mean, look, Lee McQueen on here, bless him, who John had the pleasure of dealing with before. It was like, could we, can we? Happy days, of course, in the background. When you look at that start to the season, Spurs had that 2-2 draw against Brentford where it just shows you the mark of the man at the time where he brought Romero off, who was concerned to have had concussion. And at that time, I mean, you look at Spurs' defence now, we're in a bit of a better place, you might say, centre-back-wise. But when he took Romero off, everyone's thinking, what is this guy doing? We're losing our best centre-back. Keep him on. But it just shows you the kind of morals that the guy had and the care for his players that Romero came off. Spurs got a draw against Brentford. And you look at those games, Jace highlighted them earlier. The obviously home game, his first one against Manchester United. The style of that win, the way Ange celebrated at the end with the fans. And again, it's moments like that that really, I think at the start, did bring a real symbolic feeling about what this guy was doing to the football club. And, we won 8 of our next 9 games in that spell. And scooping successive Premier League Manager of the Month awards in August, September and October. The first Australian to do that. It was remarkable to obviously see that with Ange. And I think that Chelsea game, can't get away from it, was the big, big turning point. And, at that time, Jace, I'll just take your mind back. It's the 14th minute against Chelsea. Heung-min Son has just doubled Spurs' lead against bitter rivals Chelsea. I know to you they're Blue Fulham. Many will know that from watching and listening to the show. But we're flying. We're 2-0 up. Pochettino's come back. We're, in the context of footballing terms, absolutely wiping the floor with Chelsea. But wait a minute. The flag is up. And, from that moment of that flag being up, what came next with, of course, Mickey van der Ven's injury, James Maddison's injury, Destiny Udogie being sent off, Christian Romero being sent off. I mean, it was one of those games where simply all what could go wrong did go wrong in the space of one game. I mean, could you ever imagine, Jason, is there a game like that you've ever known being a Spurs fan where you've ever seen so much go wrong? Not just the result, but everything in the way the game panned out. The red cards, the injuries, the players that were so important to us all really taken out over the course of 96 minutes, I think it was in the end.
I was struggling to think off the top of my head, I must admit, where everything went wrong. But it usually goes wrong against Chelsea, let's be honest.
No, it does,
no,
does for us.
No surprise that it happened to be against Chelsea. For 30 minutes we played, I think it was about 25, 30 minutes we played really well. And then was it 33 minutes? Maddison was rolling on his floor at one end when they broke, and Van der Ven was clutched his hamstring while Maddison was on the floor. And 3 minutes later, Romero's conceded a penalty and is sent off. And so that little spell set us back a long way. I mean, Mickey's injury was huge. I can't remember how many weeks he missed. Was it 8, 10 weeks or something like
12,
that?
I think it was 12 in the end.
12 weeks.
12.
Your doggy sending off. Okay, it was a quick ban and was back quick enough. But the fact that we got to 78 minutes or something still at 1-1 in that game, you know, I know there's been lots of toss-ups in the air because Spurs fans celebrate losing 4-1 at home to Chelsea, but you know, we got to 77 minutes and we were still alive. And even when we went 2-1 down, Eric Dyer had a goal fractionally disallowed to get to 2-2, didn't he? I think if it was we missed. Did Bentancur miss a header or something that day, or somebody
missed a header,
missed a simple header, and you think, and Sonny had a big chance. So you know, even then we could have got to 2-2 with 9 men against 11, and just if we'd have somehow pulled something around from that game, it would have made such a change to the narrative of what went forward. But you know, almost we lost that one, and then what was even more damaging was 3 days later at Wolves, where we're 1-0 up at 90 minutes, and we lose 2-1. And that really hit home, didn't it? And then that started a really bad spiral. But no, if it's going to go wrong, it always happens to Chelsea, doesn't it? Let's be honest, it always happens to Chelsea.
I watched that game again. I watched a replay of that game recently just for something I was doing, and everyone was talking about the high line and the high line. I've never seen anything like it. But when you break it down as a football coach, he was doing what other coaches would try to do, was just deny space to the opposition. He just chose a different way of doing it. You know, some teams would have done that by digging and sitting on their goal line effectively, you know, and given their 6-yard box like royal style close protection, but he just did it a different way. So coaches try and do the same thing or achieve the same ends, just slightly different methods. His are just a little bit more different than others, maybe.
What did you make of that, John, at the end there? We lost 4-1 at home to many what is a bitter rival with Chelsea, on the same tribalism for some as Arsenal, and they're being applauded off the pitch. What was your take on that?
It kind of felt like, like he'd converted. Like there was evangelical almost, wasn't it? They were like, okay, now
I've never seen that in my life.
We're worshipping at the Church of Ange now, right or wrong. This has been such a blast, and it's a recurring theme from wherever he's been in football, and I witnessed it up close at Celtic, and I think going to one of his first European games at Celtic, and I couldn't believe it. And you're watching going, what do you mean he's leaving Callum McGregor to cover all that space, and everyone's going forward, and they were playing against a decent German team, and it was like just going forward, it was just madness. But the fans were like, I don't think they sat down for a lot of the game. They were just standing, just constantly. Needed seatbelts, you know. It was like they were just so. I'd seen that, and it's interesting because you talked about the second season, and you know, at Brisbane, which was the big breakthrough for him, where he created this team. It was cranked up to 11 in the second season, right? It was just like, we are Barcelona now. It was with the Scarves of Barcelona, and it just revolutionised Australian football completely. At Celtic, it took another kick on. Celtic, I think I called it Ange Ball 2.0 in the book, that second season, where he went with that team. And you were suddenly, because the first season was like, oh, that's brilliant. This is incredibly exciting football. The second season, you were watching it with like your eyes popping out your head. Just go, whoa, what, oh, I've not seen that. And teams had no idea how to cope with them. They would just, defending teams would just run out of numbers. They would just be like, how the hell have we ended up with a 2-man overload here? We think we've got everything covered. You know, and the entry points and the way he got in, and Kyogo crashing the box and getting these deliveries. So everywhere he's been, he's improved it after the first season. And you would expect that from a coach.
Can I just ask, John? Obviously, Celtic have won the league this year with Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah.
What's been the feeling of Rodgers to Postecoglou?
There's a lot of you're not my real dad energy to Brendan.
But
from
is
fans.
that partly because of how he left, or is it just a straight
Yeah,
comparison? Because obviously he left before under a cloud to go to Leicester or something, and they weren't
yeah,
happy with that. So it
yeah.
wasn't the most popular reappointment.
There was a feeling that he just left at the first English job that came up. So it was like he had really pushed the whole "this is my club" and I've been a Celtic fan my whole life type thing. He really played on that, and then just to dash off to Leicester was seen as a bit bad. Listen, he had some issues earlier in the season, and a lot of people were critical of how his team played particularly because Kyogo wasn't scoring and wasn't playing, and I think Chris Sutton, who's never short of criticism, had said, he's killed Kyogo. He's just killed him the way they play. He's not playing the same. And I know from people talking within Celtic that Rod just didn't feel he'd actually changed that much with Ange's game. He thought they were quite similar in how they played. So he was a little bit baffled by some of the criticism. I think there's always going to be that. I mean, Ange walks off, won the treble and playing wonderful football. Anyone was going to be viewed with a bit of skepticism when they came in after that.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, we talk about the Chelsea game, what followed that. For Spurs, what followed that was just one win in their next 5, which is so Tottenham because I think the only point they picked up was away to Man City, which was inverted fullbacks of Emerson Royale and Ben Davies. Really a game, Jace, that we shouldn't really have had anything from, but we did. And I think, again, when you look at symbolic moments under Ange, that's another one where, Jace, he refused to change his way and stuck to his principles and got a result there, really against all the odds, because he had no right to go to City with Ben Davies and Emerson Royale as inverted fullbacks and come away with a 3-3
Didn't they play at
draw.
centre half? I think they played at centre half.
Might have been centre half, which is even more crazy. I mean, that game in itself tells you Ange was not going to change.
Yeah, but it's weird how we can seemingly go to City and get results, isn't it? It happened. Do you remember under Conte, we hadn't won for about 3 or 4, went there and had that fantastic win.
Yeah.
It's just something about that City game that I mean, even last year we were 2-0 up at half time in the season before, wasn't it? Before collapse, but it was like, how are Tottenham 2-0 up at half time?
Obviously, Nuno won that. Nuno beat City. Yeah.
Was it Stellini in charge then or something? I mean, it's just, there's something about that City away game. Just as the Chelsea game always goes wrong, something tends to go our way at Man City. It's bizarre.
My favourite element of that was when he got asked like the following week by someone, Sky guy, and he says, "Oh, you got a lot of praise for your tactics at Man City." Yeah. And Ange goes, "After the game, mate." It's like, we didn't get him praised before or during the game. It was like, this is chaos, this is suicide. Yeah. After the game, he got praised because it worked.
Because what was interesting about that point, John, is building up to that game, there was a lot of fans thinking, with all these injuries and suspensions, you surely can't go to City and play the same way you're playing. He's like, well, this is the only way reference back to that point, it's just who we are, mate. Again, I think that particular quote has stood with him after that Chelsea game where, again, people have mocked him for it. He's been memed for it, of course, along the number of different media platforms in the UK. And, to really, you got to say, for what he's always tried to do, he has stuck to his principles, even when fans like me have questioned whether it's been right, it's been wrong. And, just on, again, the style of play, what was quite interesting is I'm going to really fast forward here, but that game against Man City at home, which, again, I don't think I've ever been involved in that build-up of a week, Jace, that Man City game. It's impossible really to put into words of feelings about the way in which Spurs went into that game because of the consequences that could have come out of that game had Spurs beaten Man City, and it would have obviously given Arsenal a title advantage, which I know to Ange, that was a really weird week for him. And he said in hindsight, maybe he might have played that press conference differently in terms of the pre-match one because there was just a real weird feeling around the club, both internally, externally, when it comes to staff and what everybody wanted. Everyone was conflicted, I think, that week. As fans, being in the stadium, it was bizarre. But what was bizarre is that City game, Spurs played probably one of their best performances, in a long time under him. In that run that we had, it was 4 defeats in a row, the first time for nearly 20 years. And we did play ever so well. We had a change to, I think, a back 3. Dragashin came in. It actually showed Ange could be a bit more adaptable. But he was adamant at the time, John, that he's changing the games all the time. In-game, out-of-game. Yeah. It's not a case that he's only playing one way. He's changing it, really. And maybe fans are not privy to that or not seeing that, John.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go on even during a game that he'll change in terms of starting positions. And the higher you go up the ladder of football, it's just about getting players in the right starting positions. Um, but his core point, and I think we've discussed this before, if he's telling his players to have faith in this idea that this is how we play and how we dominate and how we're going to get those entry points and those deliveries and those goals, if he turns around and says, today we're doing something entirely different, they're going to say, oh, he doesn't believe it. You've given them an
It's what you
excuse.
said. It's what you said,
You,
Jace, the whole time.
you've
What I've
given
said
them
all
an
along.
you've given them an excuse that the next time the ball comes to them in a game where you're supposed to be playing football, they just launch it and go, well, it was the smart thing to do. The gaffer will be fine with that because I was under pressure. So but he'll change. Listen, you won't see exactly the same tactics next season. You just what you mean. There'll be a tweak to it. There'll be something different. There'll be changed because he said if you're coaching for this season, you're losing. You've got to be coaching for 2-3
Yeah.
years down the line. He's always looking for what it is.
Is
And
this
we talked
yeah.
earlier about like the coaching staff.
Yeah.
He could bring in someone completely different that you've not heard of,
Right.
that he's never worked with before, and
Yep.
just say because he's brought something interesting to me. He's really interesting. I like what he thinks.
Just on this point, John, I want to stick with you. Just on in terms of the style that you're mentioning there, is this down to? Do you think in that second season is it better coaching, or is it about getting better players that, as you've said in your own words, there are believers in the way he wants to play? Is it a bit of both?
That's the big thing, yeah. But also, you have more time to work with him. He's going to have a full, you mentioned it was a 72-day search or whatever it was. He'll have the full preseason. Won't be that long. He'll have time to work with him. He's had a whole season to embed the ideas. So you start. Any coach has got it. When you get that first season of a change of ideas, even if you lose 3, 4, 5 players from that, you've got a core who know what it is, who just it's shorthand for them now. You don't have to go through hours and hours of tape showing them exactly what you need or trying to do it. They know exactly what you need. And you're bringing in 3, 4 coming in. I mean, the centre forward's going to be a really interesting signing.
Yep.
What do you guys hear? I mean, I've seen a few different names, but
yeah, there's been a whole host. I mean, look again, if you're on the rumour mill, Ivan Toney's a name that's been mentioned. I know again for some they're not massive fans in terms of that profile, maybe in terms of his behaviour in the past, in terms of what he wants. But it's a really interesting one. I mean, there might be a left field name, Jace, that none of us have really thought about that walks in because, like John said there about the coaching staff element, some will come in that we had no idea was on the radar and would really surprise us. I just wonder whether, Jace, you feel it could be someone completely out of the rumour mill that we haven't seen that walks in. I know you hate Jason.
You're
hates
asking
the
me about
window, John.
transfers.
yeah.
I got to say, John, Jason hates the
Move
transfer
on.
window, so I'm not going to take him into
Move
it.
on.
What do you think, John? Who can you see coming in? Is there anybody out there you see in Europe that would really fit the way Ange wants to play?
I just go back to the probably the best his team played with Celtic was Kyogo. So that was a really mobile, clever striker. Not huge, not strong. A guy who lingered offside a lot of the time when the first ball got played wide, and then he was in a great position. And he knew a guy who he played in the system that he knew if he crashed that 6-yard box, he's getting 20 goals. Because he just this is where the ball is coming. Clever footballer, good with his feet. So I always thought that I didn't think Richarlison was ever an Ange type player. Just looking at him when he signed Madison, I was like, that's an Ange player in terms of a creative spark. He loves that kind of thing.
Yep.
The striker, I think it'll be about mobility and obviously finishing ability as well.
Yeah.
But Spurs have clearly got the same scouting system that everyone's got now, haven't they? I mean, this is so hard.
All data driven.
But it's also so hard to get. Well, the data drives you to the video, which drives you to go watch the guy and do all your due diligence. But it's so hard to find a gem now because everyone can find who the next guy in the the Slovakian Premier Division is because they've all seen him on Y-Scout 1,000 times.
Of course. It's fascinating stuff, again, on that striker element, because I think for many, we talk about, obviously, Kane's goals earlier and how that could have impacted the team with and without him. And maybe, again, that is part of the missing link, having somebody that, Richarlison had a really good actual purple patch. I think he got 8 in 9, 9 in 10 at one point in the season where it just felt that even though he got that purple patch going, John, it just felt that even with that, when he got injured, he couldn't really ever get back in consistently, and it made you wonder
Yeah.
whether he was Ange's man. I can see Jason as well, maybe acknowledging that point as well. I mean, I do think he's not fully convinced he's my man, which again makes this summer really interesting in terms of what Spurs do go on to do. I mean, what's also fascinating is that you look at the stats and the way Spurs started that season. Spurs became the first team since the Premier League became a 20 division team in 1995 to win 8 of the first 10 games and finish outside of the top 4. It really underlines that divergence between the early part of the season and what followed. And again, that's what I think left a lot of fans maybe questioning, how could you have such a good start to then kind of, as we say, meander the way through the season in the way they did. And part of that meandering, unfortunately, was where we saw that incredible win against Villa, like Jason touched upon earlier. I think Jason mentioned it in terms of one of the complete 45-minute performances that we saw, 4-0 away win to Villa. It saw Spurs really have Champions League football in their own grasp going into that final quarter of the season. They get beaten by Fulham away, which was quite a big comprehensive defeat, a 3-0 defeat where maybe none of us really saw that coming, despite Fulham, to be fair to them, picking up some decent results at home. They beat Arsenal at home. They've got some decent results under their belt. Spurs recovered. They did beat Nottingham Forest, although again, when you look at Spurs' home form, bar the first 10 games, a lot of them are really close encounters. You're looking at 2-1, 3-1 wins, but all goals that had really a lot of last-minute winners in them. And don't get me wrong, that's a sign of a good team when you get last-minute winners. It shows a team that does go to the end. But when you look at the promoted sides, I think Spurs fell behind at home to all of them and then come back to win. And I think, again, that's why there was those alarm bells and the nature of the goals that Spurs conceded. I think Spurs, when you look at their defence at the time, Spurs conceded 61 goals over the course of the season, 2 fewer than the previous season, which left them with the joint 7th best defensive record in the Premier League. But it was 32 more goals conceded than Arsenal and 27 more than champions Man City. You feel that's got to come right down, John, for the second season. And now, again, a point of last season, which was a bugbear for some, was around set pieces. Spurs conceded 32 goals from open play, 14 from set pieces, the joint 6th highest in the Premier League, at a point where Ange come out and was very dismissive about the fact he will not be deploying a set-piece coach and was absolutely adamant in his mind. And I know Jason made this point when he was on the show previously about this, that he didn't think set-pieces were the biggest issue. There was more issues to focus on, which I think for some fans out there like me, I just wanted to come out and say, I'm working on it. I appreciate there's a problem. Whereas Ange seemed fairly dismissive of it. Do you see what I'm coming from on that, John?
Yeah, I found it baffling as well, because why wouldn't you get a set piece coaching? I would imagine every Premier League club, virtually. I remember I was on a course, probably about a year and a half ago, which Austin McPhee, who's the Villa set piece coach and Scotland set piece coach, was hosting. And he said at the time when he joined, I think there were 2 or 3 in the Premier League, and he thought by then almost every team had them. And it was a fascinating course because he took us inside the room when he was dealing with it was Philip Coutinho at the time, and talking about free kicks and the amount of detail that goes into it. If that's going on at Aston Villa, that should be going on at Spurs. So it's one thing saying, oh, it's not the main problem, but it's still a problem, so fix that problem. Get yourself a set piece coach. And I wouldn't be surprised if he did at some point, maybe just had a reconsideration on that.
Is that despite the fact of him being in the media, that he tells us one thing and does something else? You wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I find it slightly baffling and confusing, because he's always everything through his career has been about like bringing people in to help as well. He's been really open and kind of bringing in different coaches because he wants to hear their viewpoints. He needs people that are going to make a contribution. He brings people into his group and he wants them to spot things that he can't spot, or come up with solutions that he can't come up with. That's what you need if you're a head coach. If you're a manager, you don't need a guy that's going, yes, boss, no, boss. Yeah, right there, boss. You need someone that's going to come up with different ideas, different solutions to things, and he'll look for that. So
I just, the feeling on, for me, with set piece coaches are the vast majority of them focus more on the attacking set pieces. And we're talking about defending the set pieces.
No, they actually spend a lot.
When you looked at it, it was corners, not free kicks. So it's one element of it. And like I keep saying, I think Vicario's a big part of that problem. And I think if Vicario sorts himself out, a hell of a lot of those goals don't go in. So I think it's more a question of sorting Vicario out than everything else.
And I think you was in the mindset, Jace, that you didn't have a real big problem with him actually playing down the dismissal around the set pieces because there was bigger fish to fry, right? In terms of the things Spurs were doing wrong alongside the set pieces at the time.
I never took the impression that he was dismissive of them like you did. I think he just said, if I work all week with set pieces, we've still got big holes in the team. So those big holes will still give us a problem, regardless of whether we concede a goal from a set piece. I think that's the context. Maybe he didn't explain it very well, but that's the context I thought of it. That teams are coming through us and even winning corners a lot easier than they should get corners. So, if we just defend the corners, what we got to do is stop conceding 10, 11 corners a game. That's the first problem. And if we don't concede 11 corners, and they only score from 1 in 4 of them, suddenly the goals we concede from set pieces will go down because we're conceding a hell of a lot less corners. So that's how I took it.
Yeah, what's interesting, John? You mentioned there about the need for a contribution when it comes to different coaches. I think what has surprised maybe some fans is that Ange came in as a solo. What I mean by that is that he walked in by himself and was really given and provided coaching members. And I know there's Millie Jedinak in there. Obviously, he knows Millie from obviously his time with the Australian national team. But I think what many were surprised is that Ange didn't come with a bit of an entourage. That might be because with us as fans, we've seen Conte Mourinho walk in with about 10, 12, 15 plus members. I'm exaggerating, of course. But are you surprised, John, there hasn't been, and maybe we'll see it this summer, more different personalities of coaching? Because he was given, maybe you'd say, the coaching members that Spurs provided. Maybe you're just working them out in season 1. You're right. Maybe season 2 coming up, we will see some big changes. Because that's the one thing he has been hinting about, I'd say, in his press conferences. He's really stressed this need for change, not just in terms of the playing staff, but also from the coaching staff as well. He's actually made that point, it feels, as well, a number of occasions.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's very clear that the first thing he does when he walks into a club is he has to convince the coaching room, because he's done this before, just gone in on his own. Yep. He has to convince the coaches there that he's the real deal. He knows what he's talking about, and that this type of football will work. Not everyone's going to be converted to it. You will then get coaches who are very willing and eager to help out, but maybe don't bring enough to the table, and that's just a a professional thing. They don't have the critical insight or the creative thinking to add value. And it's constant. I mean, listen, when Alex Ferguson used to change his assistant all the time, didn't he changed it 3-4 times during his time. You want someone in there who's going to bring you something different. If you're a head coach, you need someone that's going to bring something different. But he's been very clear. He's all through his career, even when he was working with Australia, with the young Socceroos, and just bringing coaches in to work at tournaments, to come in and help out and provide a different voice or something interesting. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we brought someone in. It won't necessarily be someone he's worked with before, though, either. It could just be someone he's heard about through the grapevine, working with somebody else, and he's thought, that sounds like an interesting character. Let's bring him in here.
Yeah. The reason why I bring that up about the coaching staff is because when Spurs were on that run of the 4 straight defeats that really put an end to any potential chance of securing Champions League football, came that week that I built up about that Arsenal week, and Jason knows what I'm going to be saying here, that was a really weird week to be around the football club. There was a real confliction of views with regards to if you wanted Spurs to win, what that would mean in terms of being a true fan. And Ange obviously went into that pre-match press conference not even thinking about anything other than winning, because that's all the guy is about, winning. I don't think he even conceived the fact that any Spurs fan in that stadium would want any other result than a Spurs win. But what I would say, again, with two, I'd like to say, me and Jason, like a lot of people, they're proper Spurs fans, is that would have been a difficult week for us to really, I would say, support the club. Because I think when that game gets going, natural instinct kicks in. Jason, you're the same as me. I couldn't chant against Tottenham or not want Spurs to score, but that was the first time, I think, in my time supporting Spurs. You might remember Man United in 99 and what, again, the implications would have done at the time. That was just a very weird week, which I think in the context of supporting Spurs in a lifetime, that shouldn't happen too often, right? It was a very weird week.
It was a rare misstep by Ange. You think he would know, having been in Glasgow.
Well, that's what I'm wondering,
It's
John. I
just
mean,
insane levels
what did you think? Did you think it was just a misunderstanding from Ange? I mean, how did you take it as an outsider? Me and Jason, obviously Spurs fans. What did you make of it
Yeah.
as an outsider looking in? Did you just get it wrong?
I just thought it was a rare misstep, misjudgment of the mood, and I
Mm.
thought it was maybe because he'd been in the insanity of the old firm, he
Yeah.
thought nothing could possibly be like that. So I'm on safe ground here. Maybe
Right.
it just lulled him into a false sense of security.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it was a weird evening. He's arguing
Yeah.
with a fan, of course, or you could say if it was a fan or not in terms of the game. But it was bizarre, Jason. I mean, the interview afterwards about there being fragilities inside and outside the football club. We're thinking we've had Conte Mourinho here. We're not losing another one this quick, are we, Jace?
Well, do you remember I was away for it, so I
Yeah.
didn't
Oh, of course.
didn't see the pre-match. I saw the game, but then
Yeah.
immediately switched off, so I didn't see the aftermatch until the kind of the
Following day.
next day. And then you see clips of interviews or headlines of interviews, and I always think, what's the context set in? But there was definitely, but then there was rumours of things going on in the dressing room after that game, wasn't there? With a couple of players. So was he kind of alluding to that? I think when you don't come out and actually fully nail it, it's always open to
It was open to
interpretation.
interpretation.
It's
Yeah,
open to interpretation. So the people that criticise Levy decide look, he's clearly saying the ball don't back me. Those who say this say, oh, he's clearly saying that. Well, he's not saying all these things in one go, but only he knows. But it was a strange week. I mean, I was there at Old Trafford in '99, so it has happened to me, and it actually happened a couple of years before that. I think when Man United came to Tottenham, might have been match day 36. I think they beat us 2-0. Where again Arsenal were going for the title, and it wasn't quite do or die, but it was a massive result for Man United to go to Tottenham and win. So it's not unusual. But the best thing he said all week was, if you don't want somebody else to win, win it yourself. And that's the key quote for me from that whole week. Is that's the quote that you should take away, and that's what he should use as motivation to everybody. If you don't like it, win it yourself.
I think
His motivation is to win the league and to be so. It would be anathema for him to even consider not wanting to win a game. They just didn't compute him. I think he could have handled it more diplomatically, but it comes from that place of like, are you nuts? Of course I'm going to win the game. Was that Australian Greek thing?
I have to say,
I think he reacted, didn't he? If I remember rightly, because I looked back at I think I saw the pre-match conference after the game the next day, because, like I say, because being away and things like that, and I thought, because then you try and put things into context of, right, what did he say? And if I remember rightly from the pre-match, there were a number of journalists suggesting to him that the fans wouldn't want, and he was saying, well, what percentage? What percentage? He got quite.
Have you polled them? Have you polled them?
Have you polled them or something? He got quite spiky and quite dismissive of it. But I'm sure when he went out that press conference with the press officer, and he must have said, "What on earth was all that?" And I'm sure one or two voices from the club would have been, "Well, you wait till tomorrow, you'll see what we mean." Because didn't he say to Bridgie or something? Have you counted them? How many in the poll? 10%, 20%? He got quite spiky, didn't he?
He did get very spiky.
So,
he was very irritable in that press conference before. He just couldn't understand, like you said, John. There, he couldn't understand how anybody wouldn't want to win a football match, and also a football match against Man City, who are the champions of England, who've got the best players. And Ange is about, as you've said on here many times, John, testing himself against the absolute best. So the thought of not giving everything, and he made this actually point afterwards that he then got very anxious and concerned about whether there'd be that integrity labelled at him, the fact that he wouldn't want the team to give their absolute maximum. And that's what made him very, I think, agitated about that whole week, really, in the build-up to it, that there could be that conceived point that nobody was championing Spurs to win. But what I've got to say is that, again, when you look back at that game, many, I think, were really valiant in the way Spurs played. They did change the style slightly. There was a real... No one could actually label at Tottenham they didn't do their best in that game to win. Just ultimately, City were the better side and went on to win the title. So when, in a weird, bizarre way, and I'm going to upset a lot of our Australian viewers and listeners here for saying this, that was the best result for a lot of people in terms of the context of what happened. But again, I appreciate for a lot of the viewers overseas, they couldn't get that because the tribalism over here in the UK is so fraught with Arsenal. It's hard to describe it, maybe for some.
Just can I just come in just on that? If he'd have gone into that pre-match press conference and been asked that question, and he said, "Yeah, we hope we lose," could you have imagined?
Oh,
Could
could
you
you
have
imagine?
imagined
Of course,
what
of
the
course.
hell the follow-up would have been? So it was one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
actually, I mean, I said it to you. I think because you wanted me to come on about the City game
Yeah,
and
I did.
explain what I'd said, didn't you? And I
Yes,
said,
yeah, that's right.
because I hope Tottenham go for it.
Yeah.
And I said, as a fan, I kind of hope we do lose the game, but players and
You
the
can't- you
managers
can't think that.
should
You can't
be
say that. Yeah.
absolutely demanding you try to win the game for the whole integrity of the sport. And if you can't deliberately lose a game of football, and you know what, if I had any player at Tottenham that, whatever the circumstances,
No, you wouldn't want 'em.
deliberately lost
Yeah,
a
you
game
wouldn't
of
want 'em.
football,
You wouldn't want them.
you wouldn't want them at the football club. So,
No, exactly.
as supporters, we thought it'd be handy if we lose. But, when Sonny was going through, I wanted him to score. I wanted him to score.
Because the fan of you took over. The fan of you
of course
took
it is.
over.
The fan takes over and you think, oh, come on, Sonny, score. And when he missed,
You're
kind of
relieved.
went like that. And then you thought, oh, shit, thank God he missed. But for that split second, you wanted him to score.
Yeah, it was again a really weird week, and it's the only time really I would say. And again, fans obviously feel free to have open interpretation. Everyone's got their own view. I think it's the only time I would say that in Ange's time at Spurs where he just was again that disconnect with the fans on that one occasion. But again, I think the press conference afterwards, in terms of I think the follow-up presser, I think again with fans he made the point that look. He wants to win. And I think, Johnny, if he wasn't wanting to win, there'd be a problem there. And again, I think that underlines really going into the second season, just what this man is about. He wants to win at all costs. And I think, again, when you look at what Spurs is to come, Europe is on the agenda. I don't want to keep you too long, John. You okay for another 10, 15 minutes? Is that okay if I just discuss the European part with you?
Good, yeah.
I must ask you, John, because season 2, he's going to bring some really different obstacles that he hasn't faced in season 1. And, I think season 1 had its challenges with obviously the cup and the way Spurs went out to them. Fulham's been a cup game that I know many are still frustrated about. Me, Jason knows how I feel about the cups. To make 9 changes didn't really sit well with me in terms of that Fulham game. I appreciate he was still getting to know his team, getting to know his squad, but I just think, there's an opportunity there to progress. FA Cup, look, you're facing Man City. It's one of the best teams in the world. They suffocated Spurs over the course of the 89 and a bit minutes and got a winner. They were unlucky to draw, maybe you'd say. But Jason's always said to me, you've got to beat one of the big teams along the way if you are going to win a cup. So going into the second season, how do you see him, John, balancing European football with domestic league, given the way you've seen him at Celtic and how he's handled that in the past? Should we be optimistic? Should we be concerned? How do you think we should feel?
I think it's new territory because of the strength of the league. We come back to this. So if you're Australian and playing Asian Champions League, you can, you maybe rest some players here and there, and you're in Japan doing it. You can maybe rest some players for the domestic games and go and focus on that. Again, at Celtic, if you're playing St. Mirren at home on the Saturday and Real Madrid on the Wednesday night, it's pretty obvious what your priority game is there, and you could probably get away with it, which he did. It's so hard to do that in the Premier League, even without looking at fixtures, knowing when it's going to be. I mean, whoever you're playing, it's a bloody tough game, isn't it? Unless it's the brand new promoted team that have suddenly, completely collapsing. You're going to have a tough game before it. So that's going to be probably the biggest problem, because he likes to work with quite a tight squad as well,
Yeah. Yep.
He likes to rely on the same X number of players. So listen, that's a new challenge. This is probably something that he's not faced before.
Interesting.
In terms of just the difficulty of balancing it. Different if it was Champions League, maybe, because you don't have any option there. You've got to go for hell for leather in the Champions League, because if you're a Premier League team in the Champions League, you've got to think you can win it, just given the strength of the league, and you're probably already one of the top 16 teams in the competition. You've got to be trying to get there and get to the quarterfinals at least, and then anything can happen. So, but yeah, with it not being the Champions League, and I don't know if he's learned or if he's going to adapt from what happened in the Cups. I know you've spoken about this with me before, about how he kind of because he wants to win the league, he's not interested. Not he's not interested, but he's prioritising trying to get things right in the league. But a cup means a lot to Spurs. You know?
Everything.
Yeah.
Well, I say everything. I think to the older, again, I don't speak for fans again, but I think the older generation would love to see a cup.
Yeah.
Maybe the younger generation, it is about playing in the Champions League. Although, don't get me wrong, look, we're on a 16-year trophy drought, so I don't care whether you're young, old, or whatever. You want to win a trophy. You want to see silverware. And I think, again, that's why I think the second season will be really interesting, because you're balancing, of course, not only European football, but that whole Thursday to Sunday turnaround. And with no disrespect, John, you made that point there. He's not facing Simmering on a Saturday, and Real Madrid on a Wednesday. He might be facing Man City away on a Thursday, Man City away on a Sunday.
Yeah,
playing Europe on a Thursday. That's why, again, I really wonder how he's going to cope with that turnaround. And you say it there, it might be new territory for him, given the competition that he's up against. Right?
But what would a European Cup mean for you guys? I mean, I go back to Anderlecht. Was that 84? Was it Stevie Archibald? I mean, geez, I remember staying up watching that, and it was just amazing and brilliant.
It was there, mate. It's still the best night I've had. Still the best night I've had.
Yeah. Stevie Archibald still thinks is one. I mean, who's played Barcelona and everywhere, still thinks is one of the greatest nights of his life. Great, best kind of times of his career when he was at Spurs there. So, and you saw what happened with West Ham. I mean, like winning a European trophy.
Listen,
nobody cares. It's Europa Conference League, whatever it is. It's. I remember Fulham winning the Intertoto Cup. They were like, it's great.
I can tell you, in Jason's mind, there's certain things that are acceptable. A dog shitting on the pitch in the Conference League is where Jason draws the line, Jason. Am I right?
Don't forget the numbers drawn on the backs of the shirts in one of the games, because the numbers were all peeling off. But, West Ham won it, and they think that they're champions of Europe.
All I would say, John, is I think I would lose Jason for the conference checker trade shows if we had checker trade next season.
Not interested in the checker trade.
I think the Europa League is still a very credible competition. I think, again, what's interesting, and Jason made the point on our last show, because of the format of that competition, the way that's laid out, that is itself a really attractive proposition for Spurs, that if they take it seriously, which I think Ange will, because look, that's a guy that I think every competition he does go into, he wants to win it. Look, whatever happened last season, happened last season. But I think he does understand the meaning of trophies. Look wherever he's been, John, he's won trophies, as you've told us on numerous occasions. For me, I do wonder how he'll manage that Thursday to Sunday element. And again, the nature of the competition. Because like you said there for you, John, it is fairly new territory, given the quality of opposition he'll face from Thursday through to Sunday. I think it'll be completely different. Do you know what I mean? What do you think, Jace?
It depends what he's told from upstairs, doesn't it?
Do you honestly think that, Jace? Do you think it's all down to that? Do you think it's down set by the hierarchy?
No, it's not all down to it. But if you reach a certain stage of the season and you're third or something, and you get the nerve to check whatever happens in this season, we need to finish in the top four, then it puts a difference on it. I don't know how his contract is. What's his big bonuses in terms of contracts and things. Yeah. So, don't get me wrong. I think every Spurs manager has wanted to win a trophy, but there comes a stage in the season where it's, hold on, and also our players' contracts are set up. Is there far more bonus in players' contracts to be in the Champions League? Yeah. And, most players now want to be in the Champions League. So, it's not all down to just what the manager wants.
Yeah. I've been asking this question, and Jason's going to have it in a few weeks' time because it's too early for him now. But I have to ask you, John, when you look at next season, bearing in mind the way Spurs finished the season, obviously they lost 5 of their last 7 games. And I think there is a feeling that for some, Jason made this great point, that you look at Spurs' fixtures in terms of what they've got in the opening 10 fixtures. I think, Jason, you made this point, I think the 7 out of the 10, they lost last season. So there will be, I think, an emphasis on how Spurs do start the season with regards to that mood under Ange. I think many, like I say, as a whole, have been delighted by the brand of football, the style of it, and they do think with better players, more coaching, we are going to see an improvement on last season. But how important in your mind, John, is it that he does hit the ground running, and he could really do the start he had like last season, going unbeaten in the first 10, right?
Yeah, and nothing to do with writing the book or knowing the guy or anything like that, or finding out about him. Just looking from the outside in. I mean, it's like dieting, isn't it? You go, well, we're going to stick with this because this is definitely the right way to do. In the long term, we're going to be really healthy and fit. And then your morale gets a bit low. And you're like, look, I'm talking here. I know where I'm talking from here. Morale, you get a bit depressed, and your blood sugar gets a bit low, and I'll just I'm going to make a change. Bollocks to it. And that's what you worry about in when you look at particularly the Premier League. Although I've seen it in Scotland increasingly, they bring coaches in September and get rid of them in April and stuff like that, because you're like, well, this is a great idea. We definitely want to change the style of play we have, and we're going to throw everything at this, and then, oh, we missed out on the top 6. Okay, see ya. It's like you do wonder at football clubs sometimes, and Spurs are, a little bit flaky when it comes to this.
Well,
not really staying the course.
I think the fair point of this, John, is that they don't tend to stick to the plan. They like shortcuts. Yeah. They like, ways to find success quicker, like they have tried to do with Mourinho and Conte and gone for win now managers. Is this about, John, in your mind, sticking to the call, sticking to the long term, because you've seen the guy and researched the guy, and he does end up bringing success at every club he's been at. But the question is, can he do it in the biggest league in the world, with some of the best coaches, the best managers, and some of the best players?
Yeah, I mean, he's had success. He's had some failures as well. And the bottom line in football, nobody knows anything. That's it, particularly chairman and chief executives. And it's like the Hollywood rules, isn't it? You have success, make a small budget movie in Hollywood, and they throw you £100 billion and say make a blockbuster with it. So there's no guarantees in anything. Oh, you can look at a guy's track record and say, everywhere he's been, he's followed these steps and it has delivered success more often than not. And that's all any manager can say. I mean, Ancelotti can say that, Ancelotti was at Everton, for God's sake. What was that all about?
Yeah,
so I mean, like,
I said that's
the greatest manager ever.
It's unbelievable. You just don't think, you just thought that was a kind of side check. It was in COVID, obviously, that period. It's like it never existed. Ancelotti at Everton. Mental.
I think Ange's got a little bit extra grit about him as well.
Right.
He's got a little bit extra hardness in there that comes from his background.
So you don't think it's all about needing a necessary good start? It's about finding them maybe their way into next season? Because I think that's one of the things at the moment. Jason's pulling a face there. I think given the way they finished last season, I think he needs a fairly strong start.
I think you probably need it just to get the fans back on board.
Absolutely.
I think, the key word that he needs is believers. We said that earlier.
Yeah.
And I think by the end of the season, he knew there were non-believers in that team. That Newcastle game, I think, was the real trigger one, where he said, he was quite angry at that Newcastle performance, where we didn't do this, we didn't do that. And I think, when you're a team that's got pumped 3-0 by Fulham, you're 3-0 down to Arsenal, you're 4-0 down at Newcastle, you're 4-0 down at Liverpool, it's hard to believe that this is the right way. And I think, Rick, like we said, you're in that category. You're looking at it thinking,
I'm concerned,
I don't believe it. So that's not digging you out.
No, you're right. I've got concerns.
And I think as the season went on, you're not the only one amongst the last word on Spurs that is somebody with serious doubts and a non-believer. So if you go into next season and you lose that Arsenal game and you lose the West Ham game and you get pumped at Newcastle, it's hard to keep believers on board when you're constantly getting. It's one thing to go to Newcastle, lose the game, you've played really well, Nick Pope's man of the match, a bit like the Villa home game where we lost the game but played really well.
That's right.
If that happens, you get a performance and the VAR decision goes against you and you come away with a loss, you think, right, that's different. But you can't go there and get pumped 4-0.
No.
And you can't go to Liverpool and be 4-0 down in 60 minutes, and you can't be 3-0 down at home to Arsenal in 35 minutes and things like that, because then the believers, both within the club, in the terraces and in the boardroom, will be, it's not working, mate. It's, you can see what you want. And I think Daniel, I think, stayed on board this season because we were in and around that top 4 until, if we win the Manchester City game, we could well have got Europe. I think we would have got Europe. We would have got 4th. Yeah. But I think Daniel's tending to pull the plug when he sees and he thinks we're not going to get top 4. And I think when Poch went and he was 14th, and when, Mourinho went and he thought, I think after that 0-0 draw at Bournemouth, regardless of a cup final, he thought we're not going to get in the top 4.
Yeah.
And then with the Conte mess, we're not going to get in the top 4. That's, I think, when Daniel traditionally thinks about pulling the plug. So he needs to keep believers on board, and that's a tough start to the season.
Yeah,
because the press. Don't forget, the press always have to have the club in crisis, and if Tottenham have lost 6 of their first 10, believe it, you me, Tottenham will be the club in crisis. There always has to be one that the media force down your throats.
Do they have a
As we-
cracked crest that kind of like that? No,
Oh,
cracked
there's
crest.
just there
We've
has
been
to
there,
be
John.
one, doesn't there?
We've
You
been
know,
there,
Man
John,
United
before.
have been the club in crisis for most of the season. So,
Yeah.
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
they're
even when
cracking fun.
But even when, you know, you look at it, Ten Hag's going to a cup final and his press conference is dominated by, are you still going to be here? It's, you know, come on, the bloke's in a cup final. And as soon as he wins it, he still asks the question because you've got to have the club in crisis.
Yeah,
There
but it's
always
because
has
he
to
had
be
this
one.
because he had your man from Ineos telling everyone that he's looking for interviewing
But,
3 different
you know, and
candidates.
it may be Arnie Slot. You know, it may be Arnie Slot that the media get onto very
Yeah.
quickly as well. But
Yeah.
and there's other new Premier. But I think, you know, Ange needs a big start
Yeah.
and he needs 1 or 2 big results. A big win against not a big win in terms of the scoreline, but a win against Arsenal.
A
would
statement
be
win.
Yeah.
huge.
We're
He
looking at a
needs it
statement
because
win, aren't we?
what
Yeah.
we drew and lost to Arsenal.
Yeah.
We beat Liverpool with, let's be honest,
Yeah.
it was dodgy circumstances, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
It was
You
a
know,
weird game.
down
Yeah.
to 9 men so we lost at home to City twice, drew at City, lost at home to Arsenal, drew with them there. You know, didn't win at West Ham, lost
Yeah.
at home to West Ham. So
Yeah.
those 4 or 5, what we always think about as the key fixtures,
Yeah.
with the exception of Liverpool, where we were lucky to win, we didn't win any of them. He needs a couple of those early on, I think,
Well,
to
look,
keep the
I mean,
believers
again,
on board.
you look at August, September, they've got obviously Newcastle there away, third game in. Then they obviously face Arsenal on the 14th, just after the international break. It'll be interesting, obviously, how Spurs do in those first couple of weeks. Because again, Jason's right. You know, he may be in need of a big result early doors, depending on what happens. But look, again, it is about the long term. So I find it bizarre, John, that the final 2 questions I'm going to ask you is just the nature of how football does change in the last time we spoke to you. And it's crazy I ask you this. So the first one I'll ask you, John, is what would you class as success for Ange in his second season in charge?
I think top 4 has become huge for people.
Apart
so
from
I
Ange.
think,
I mean,
it
that's
is.
the funny
He's
thing,
not-
isn't it? What do you
Yeah,
make of that
but it
very quickly?
is.
What do you make of that narrative, John, about him
It
shutting
is.
down
All
top 4?
I got what he meant, which was like just because we finished top 4 doesn't make us a Champions League team.
Yeah,
You need to be ready for the Champions League. So I think
yeah,
he will want to have built a team that is ready for the Champions League, first of all. In his mind, he'll want to win the league next year. Whether that's possible in an era when Manchester City can just blow everyone off the park with their spending is another question.
yeah. So you think top 4 would be seen as ultimate progression for Spurs next season?
Probably, but he'd probably tell you he'll want to win the league next year. He'll want to, and he'll probably believe he can do it.
Yeah,
Because it's the only way he thinks. It's the only way he thinks. It's not about finishing second and third. It never has been.
And the final question I want to ask you, John, is the funny thing is when I last had you on here, I said to you, should I be concerned? This is how football changes, right? Jason's going to laugh when I say this next bit. Should I be concerned about Liverpool's reported interest in Ange Postecoglou? And the reason I'm laughing is because I was driving Jason mad over 4 weeks saying, you watch, Liverpool going to come in for him. And there was a point I laughed and said to Jason, I was going to drive him to Liverpool, let alone Liverpool come in for him. So the last question I want to ask you, John, is that given his CV, I think his CV does show that he doesn't spend many, many years at football clubs. Therefore, do you think, you say their top 4 is progression? You don't think this season it is imperative to win a trophy to keep Ange Postecoglou motivated to be the Spurs head coach?
Yeah, it's tricky. He says he always plans as if he's going to be somewhere forever,
Mm.
and then it never works out that way.
Yep.
You'd be kind of foolish to imagine that you're going to be at Spurs for a very long time, because what is the sweet spot to be at Spurs for a very long time? Because either you win the league, in which case somebody is going to take you, right? Or you finish 6th and you get sacked. So is it you've just and you haven't delivered a trophy? So you've probably got to finish 3rd and win a cup to appease everyone every year. What is the sweet spot to stay at Spurs for? What's usually the longest serving manager in the last 20 years?
Well, it's Pochettino, isn't it? Maurizio,
Yeah.
and before that, Harry Redknapp.
Yeah,
and neither of them
just...
won a trophy. But what they did do is they played a brand of football that did excite the fans, similar to what Ange did. But over that time with Harry and with Maurizio, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Jace, they found more consistency to the game. we're only season 1 under Ange. It's hard to judge him on season 1. Like you said there, second season we should see improvement. Is that fair, Jace?
Yeah, we're quite a unique club, aren't we? We kind of loved Poch and he didn't win a trophy. We loved Harry Redknapp, he didn't win a trophy. We loved Martin Yeo, he didn't win a trophy. The two managers we despised were George Graham and Wandy Ramos, and they're the last two that won a trophy. So it's quite strange at Tottenham. But I think certainly the last couple of jobs he's left, because it's probably been a case as well where I've done the job. What more can you do at Celtic than win the treble? You're not going to win the European Cup, are you, at Celtic? Let's be honest. Possibly, I suppose, Rangers were in a Europa League final and Celtic were in one not that long ago, were they? Didn't they play Mourinho or something early? Was it 2003? Something like that. 2003. So we have seen two Scottish, but I suppose he thinks, I've done the treble, so what more can I do?
Yeah. And listen, if he wins the league at Spurs, he's completed life. Don't let him on completed football. I mean, that'd be incredible.
So
where'd you go from winning the league?
If he was to win a trophy, if he was to win a trophy, not the league, if he was to win a trophy next season at Tottenham, he'd think, well, I still want to win the league and I still want to compete at the highest level. So there's still a stage to go to. But I mean, I think Poch said it, didn't he? If he'd have won that Champions League final, even he'd have had second thoughts, because what more can I do? I've reached the absolute pinnacle. So I think that kind of will determine whether he wants. But like I say, I think he needs believers on board, and he needs results to go his way quite early, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, John. Listen, your vibe, John, going into next season, how do you feel? I mean, as an outsider looking in, are you excited for it? Are you fearful for Ange? What do you think in your mind, and looking from the outside in, holds?
I keep coming back to, obviously I haven't spoken to a lot of people in the writing the book, and 2 or 3 said the same thing, that he's been through a lot of pain, a lot of hurt in football to get to this point, a lot of rejection, coming from the wrong side of the world and having to prove himself. But he deep down believes that he can be the best coach in world football. So I think that drives him. I think the one guarantee, it's certainly not going to be dull, right? It's just going to be.
It never is.
Again, I think I said it when I first came on, and you guys, when he was just arriving, I said, get seatbelts fitted to that new stadium of yours, because it's just going to be terrifying at times, but electrifying at others. I think you'll see more of the same.
Yeah, well, you promised that, John. It was a nightclub in there for the first 10. I won't say it was like for the final 20, but it was interesting. John, I want to say
it's like closing time at a nightclub for the last 20.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody knew where they was in those last 20 games. Heads were everywhere. I want to say a massive thank you, John. A reminder, obviously, of course, that there's over 3,500 of you watching this live. Thank you so much for your support. Again, I think we'll definitely be advocates of this book. I know Jason's read it back to back as well.
And
there you go. John proudly holds a copy up there. A reminder, John, anywhere else you want to give us a shout? Amazon, of course, probably one of the main central buys you can get it. Anywhere else you want to give it a mention to?
You can buy it direct from Berlin. All good bookshops and a few bad ones.
Amazing. Listen, it's a great time to get the book because, again, I read over this on your summer break, summer holiday. It's a really good, interesting read because it will give you a lot of information about what Ange dealt with in the second season at clubs. And as you've heard it from John there, to some degree, this is new territory for him, given the nature of the league, the talent within it, the managers, the players, and it's fascinating. It will be a lot of intrigue going into that second season. And you know, by Jason being here, the transfer window is yet to really kick off, which is why I've managed to get him on for this one. So hold your hats, because it feels like the transfer window will be dictated a lot by what Spurs can do to back the manager. I want to say, Jace, a massive thank you, mate. Really appreciate it.
No problems, mate. No problems.
Enjoyable. These are enjoyable. I feel like these are really more enjoyable than the games, aren't they? Some of these shows.
Yeah, they are. I always say that to you. Yeah. Let me do more of these, not those bloody games. I mean, part of that, part of that is, and I've said it to you.
Yeah.
I want to watch the game and just enjoy the game,
and not think about doing podcasts,
and not think about doing where you think, oh, what happened to this, and where did he go, and what happened there with that goal. And I just think, especially when you do it so early, I've said it to you, Rex. Part of the reason when I left, it wasn't just Mourinho. It was, do you know what? I want to watch a game and
not think
enjoy
about
the game. Turn the telly off afterwards. Put the golf on. Put the cricket on. Put the swimming on. Put the volleyball on. Put Wimbledon on. Put whatever on. But just enjoy the game and move on from it. Yeah. And it can be too much sometimes. So that's part of it anyway.
Yeah. Oh, man, look, you can see a lot of comments coming through there. People have got the book. They've stolen it for holiday reading. They've not had it back. Make sure you go and get your copy. John,
Just
I want
buy
to
another
say,
copy. I mean,
buy another
obviously.
copy. Yeah, buy another copy. Why not? I want to say, John, a massive thank you, mate, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Always
And
love it,
listen,
guys.
we look forward to having you back on with us in due course.
All right. Cheers, boys.
Top man. Listen, from myself, from Jason, from John, guys, keep safe, keep well. We're back with you soon, as always.